There was a version of history you were taught in school: kings and queens, elections and parliaments, wars declared, treaties signed, empires risen and fallen, all of it moving according to the visible logic of power, public figures making public decisions. That version of history is not wrong. It's just incomplete. Because behind every empire in recorded history, there has been another structure. Quieter, older, one that does not hold elections, does not issue press releases, and does not appear in any official record, unless someone, somewhere, makes a mistake. The British Empire was the largest in human history. At its peak, it controlled nearly a quarter of the Earth's land surface. It reshaped continents, it rewrote borders, it decided which peoples would thrive and which would be broken. And the official story says it was run by Parliament, by the Crown, by ministers and generals and colonial administrators whose names fill the history books. But there are researchers, intelligence insiders, and declassified documents that point to something else entirely. A body so secretive it has no official name, only a number: 300. To understand the Council of 300, you have to first understand how real power actually works. It does not announce itself. Real power does not need to. It operates through institutions, banks, trading companies, intelligence networks, academic societies, structures that appear neutral, even philanthropic, while quietly determining the outcomes of wars, economies, and governments. The British Empire understood this earlier than anyone. By the 17th century, Britain had created something that had never existed before in human history: a private corporation with its own army, its own navy, its own diplomatic corps, and the legal authority to govern entire nations. The corporation was known as the British East India Company. At its height, the East India Company controlled more territory than most nation-states. It employed more soldiers than the British Crown itself. It taxed populations, fought wars, and extracted wealth on a scale that staggers the modern imagination. And it was run not by elected officials, but by a board of directors answerable to its major shareholders. This is where the thread begins. Because those shareholders, a concentrated circle of aristocratic families, banking houses, and merchant dynasties, did not disappear when the East India Company was dissolved in 1874. They reorganized. The term Committee of 300 did not emerge from conspiracy forums or fringe pamphlets. It emerged from a report written by a British intelligence officer named Walter Reithenow in the year 1909. Reithenow, later Germany's foreign minister, wrote that 300 men, all of whom knew one another, directed the economic destiny of Europe. He was not writing fiction. He was writing from observation, from the inside of the world he had described. His words were largely ignored. Then, decades later, a former British MI6 officer named Dr. John Coleman published a detailed study based on what he claimed were classified intelligence files. Coleman identified the Committee of 300 as a governing body, not a government, but something above governments, composed of the ruling families of Europe, the heads of the major banking dynasties, and the directors of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies and multinational corporations. Coleman's list included names that recur in nearly every significant geopolitical event of the 20th century: the Rothschild family, the Warburgs, the Rhodes Trust, the same institution that funds the Rhodes Scholarship and has quietly placed thousands of its graduates into positions of political influence across the Western world for over a century. The Royal Institute of International Affairs, known publicly as Chatham House, founded in 1920, whose membership has included virtually every British Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary since its creation. An institution whose meetings operate under strict rules of secrecy, whose conclusions shape policy without ever appearing on a ballot. These are not invented institutions. They are real. They are documented. Their membership lists, where they exist at all, read like a directory of most powerful people on earth. The question is not whether these institutions exist. The question is what they decide and who they answer to. What makes the Council of 300, or whatever name it has operated under across the centuries, so difficult to expose is precisely its sophistication. It does not rule directly. You see, direct rule is fragile. Direct rule creates targets, faces, names, addresses. Direct rule can be overthrown. What the network described by Reithenau and Coleman and a handful of other insiders operates instead as an architecture of influence. Layers of institutions, each one visible and legitimate on its own, that together form a system of control invisible to anyone looking from the outside. Think of it this way. You control the central bank. The central bank controls the interest rates. The interest rates determine whether governments can afford to borrow. Governments that cannot borrow cannot function. Governments that cannot function do what they told or they collapse, to be replaced by someone more cooperative. You never have to fire a single shot. You never have to appear in a single newspaper. You sit in a room with 299 others who understand the same logic, and you make decisions that will reshape the lives of billions of people who will never know your name. This is not a theory. You see, the Bank of England was privately owned for over 250 years before it was nationalized in 1946. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, remains to this day a private institution whose shareholders are not fully disclosed to the public. These are facts, documented, verifiable. What remains in shadow is the layer above them. Across the 20th century, moments of unusual transparency have offered brief, uncomfortable glimpses behind the curtain. In 1966, Professor Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown University, a man with access to the inner records of the institutions he studied, published a book called Tragedy and Hope. In it, he confirmed the existence of a network of elite families and banking interests that had operated as a kind of parallel government across the Anglo-American world for over a century. He did not condemn it. He believed it was largely benevolent. But he confirmed its existence. The book was quietly pulled from circulation. Its publisher allowed it to go out of print without explanation. Used copies became rare. Quigley himself later said that he had been pressured over what he had revealed. A professor, at once of America's most elite universities, pressured into silence. In 1992, a leaked document from a European policy meeting described a process called controlled disintegration, the deliberate management of national economies to ensure dependency on supranational functional institutions. The document was real. Its authors were identified. The coverage lasted approximately one news cycle before vanishing. And then there is the matter of the Chatham House rule itself, the formal policy under which the world's most powerful people regularly gather to discuss global affairs with a legally enforced guarantee that nothing said in the room can ever be attributed to its speaker. In any other context, we would call that a secret meeting. When the most powerful people on earth hold them, we call it a think tank. Now, here is what we know with certainty. The British Empire did not operate through Parliament alone. It operated through private institutions. Trading companies, banking houses, intelligence networks. Those were never democratically accountable and never intended to be. Those institutions did not dissolve when the empire ended. In fact, they evolved. The men and families who directed them did not step aside. They moved into international organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, the United Nations itself. Bodies that wield enormous power over national governments while remaining largely insulated from democratic oversight. Whether you call this the Council of 300, the Committee of 300, or simply the logical consequence of concentrated wealth across generations, the structure is real. And what remains unresolved is its precise shape, the name at the very center, the exact nature of the coordination, The full extent of what has been decided in rooms the public has never been allowed to enter. History records what power once recorded. Everything else gets buried in sealed archives, in out-of-print books, in the careful silence of institutions that have survived for centuries by never appearing in the story at all. The British Empire may be gone, but the network that built it? Well, it never really needed an empire to survive. It only needed the world to keep believing that the people it could see were the ones actually in charge. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. And now, you've walked through one. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.